Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the Cowboy Alex story, we ride the stories of the West Campfire, truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers. Gritty humans, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The wind clawed at the hills like a thing with lungs. Snow hammered the roof, sifted under the door, rattled the windows until the glass sang. Jack Rowan stirred venison and beans in a black pot and watched the oil lamp tremble above the table. The flame made a soft bowl of gold on the boards. Everything beyond it was cold. Noah sat near the hearth with his pocket knife shaving curls off a stick. Lily tucked her cloth doll under her chin and listened to the house breathe. Jack tasted the stew, salt and iron, enough for 3 if he scraped the sides. He ladled careful portions into tin bowls, then slid his own bowl back to the edge of the table. He could make do with less. The barn door banged. Snow blew in like smoke. Noah stumbled through the entry cheeks, raw eyes too big. "Pa," he blurted. "Someone fell down by the horse stalls." Jack set the ladle in the pot and took his coat from the peg. The canvas was stiff with cold. He shoved his feet into boots without minding the laces. "Stay by the fire, Lily." He looked at Noah. "Show me." The night bit his teeth. Wind shoved at his chest. He pushed into it anyway, following the boy's small shadow across the yard. The barn rose out of the white like a ship half buried. Inside was dark, except for a lantern on a nail. Breath steamed from the horses and curled in the shadows. She lay by the threshold with her back to the door, a spill of white on the boards. Her hair had frozen into fine threads along her neck. Ice glittered on her lashes. One hand clutched a small leather bag hard against her ribs as if it weighed nothing and everything. Her dress had once been fine, the lace now gray with mud. Her lips were split. Her skin held the blue of a river under winter light. Jack dropped to his knees. His fingers were clumsy in his gloves. He ripped them off and set 2 fingers to her throat. A faint pulse moved quick and thin. "Still warm," he said. Noah hovered, breathing fast. "Is she dead?" "Not tonight." He slid an arm under her shoulders. "Help me." They lifted her. She was heavy with ice and soaked cloth. He shrugged his coat around her, the wool swallowing her, and stood with her bundled against him. He could feel the stitch of her breath, shallow and stubborn. The lantern drew a small shine off a ring on her finger. Gold. Not the cheap kind. Snow took the breath from his mouth as they crossed the yard. Ice squeaked under his boots. Inside, the warm air hit like a hand. Lily stood up, doll forgotten. Her eyes went round when she saw the white dress. "Blankets," Jack said, "everything thick." He laid the woman near the hearth and pulled the rug closer, then stacked wood and coaxed flame into a stronger mouth. Steam lifted from the lace. The air shifted to wet wool and horse sweat and cold skin. Noah dragged quilts from the bed. Lily brought a patchwork cloth that smelled like sun and cinnamon. Jack tucked the edges under the stranger's chin, rubbed her forearms, blew into his hands, rubbed again. He did not touch the ring. "Drink," he said to the fireplace more than to her. He lowered a spoonful of broth toward her lips. A thin sound rose in her throat. "Please," she whispered, "do not send me back." Jack bent closer. Her breath touched his cheek. It smelled of blood and old sugar. "You are in my house," he said. "You are safe here." Her eyes opened slow. The irises were dark as wet soil. For a moment she did not know where to land her gaze. Then she saw the children and flinched as if children could be dangerous. "Not Hale's place," she said. The word Hale came like a bruise. Jack's jaw went tight. "You know Victor Hale. I am his wife." Her mouth trembled around the word wife. "From St. Louis. A letter. Money that was not mine. He sent for me." A minister read a verse. The ink was still wet when he changed his face. The wind pressed a long palm against the wall. Jack kept his voice low. "He hit you." She blinked once. Twice. He said I lied about being untouched. He called me dirt. He opened the door and told me to get out. I did not take a coat. I did not know which way to run. "Jack," Noah said from the table, voice small. "Mr. Hale told Mr. Pratt at the store he was getting a bride-like from a catalog." Lily edged closer with the patchwork cloth and placed it on the woman's chest like a blessing. The woman curled her fingers in the edge and held on. Jack stood and faced the shelf by the stair. There sat a framed photograph of Martha, his dead wife, one hand on Noah's hair, the other holding Lily at the waist. A strip of black crepe was pinned to Jack's shirt pocket. He reached up but did not touch the frame. "Eat," he told the children, "then sleep." He carried water to the pot and added a fist of beans. He pulled the oil lamp closer. Its glass was warm under his palm. The flame danced in the draught, but it stood. Outside, the wind roared and caught in the rafters a long, hollow note. The horses shifted. One mare pawed at the stall and snorted. Jack glanced toward the barn through the tiny window. The barometer needle on the shelf had fallen hard since morning. "Your name?" he asked quietly. She swallowed. "Eliza Hart." "You can rest here, Eliza Hart." He faced the children. "No one touches her. No one speaks the name Hale in this room." Eliza's gaze slid to the cupboard where his wife's things sat folded. Her eyes caught on a small folded handkerchief with a border of crooked red stitches. A thread hung loose from one corner like a small flag. She pulled her own leather bag closer. The flap gaped. Inside lay a square of linen white, once now gray at the edges, an E stitched in red. She held it to her mouth as if a letter could give air. Jack noticed the bag. He noticed the bone-white knuckles around it. He said nothing. A man could drown a person with questions in a night like this. He placed a chair beside the hearth and sat with his forearms on his knees. The heat reached his shins first, then his hands, then finally his chest. He watched Eliza's breath even out to a quiet saw. Lily fell asleep with her doll against her chin. Noah nodded off over his bowl spoon still in his grip. The hour grew full. Snow hit the window in sheets. The lamp made its small circle. Eliza shifted once and whispered something he could not catch. He leaned in. "Water," she said, eyes still closed. He held the tin cup to her mouth. She drank in short sips that clinked against her teeth. He took the cup away, and she lifted her fingers, as if to hold it longer. He set the cup beside the lamp. The brass looked like a coin of sun in night. "Victor will come," she said softly. "He will bring paper. He will say I am his." "You are not a mule," Jack said. "He can bring his whole ledger." Eliza's lips twitched. To laugh would have taken more strength. In the quiet, after Jack took the black strip from his pocket and laid it flat on the table, he did not put it away. He did not wear it. He watched the line of it. He felt the weight of it in his ribs, where grief had built its plank floors. The mare out back answered the wind with a sharp stamp and a long breath. Jack stood. He took his coat from the peg and then set it back. He checked the door latch. He checked the window. He checked the lamp and turned the wick until the flame steadied. Noah stirred and blinked. "Pa, is she going to die?" "Not tonight," Jack said. Eliza's hand slid from the quilt onto the rug. Her fingers found the patchwork cloth and the loose red thread. Without opening her eyes, she tugged it free. She wound it once around her finger as if to prove she was still here. The house held that small sound, thread against skin, wind against wood. The clock on the shelf ticked with a tired heart. A knock sounded at the door. 3 heavy knocks. The lamp flame shivered and drew itself thin. The knock shook the wood once more, then the wind rushed into the gap under the sill and made the lamp gutter. Jack stood and crossed the floor in 3 strides. He eased the latch and cracked the door 2 fingers wide. A fur limb scraped the jamb and thumped again. No footprints. No lantern light on the road. Just snow driving sideways and the barn hunched under it. He shut the door and set the bar. He checked the children, then the woman by the hearth. Her breath found a slow rhythm. The thread she had wound around her finger left a faint red ring. Jack laid another log on the fire and sat back down. He did not sleep so much as lean into the heat and listen for the smallest wrong sound. The storm went on until it forgot itself. At dawn, the wind fell away. Cold held everything still. The window showed a world of white up to the fence rails and a sky the color of tin. Jack poured the lamp low and took water off the hook. Steam rose and carried the smell of iron from the kettle. Eliza stirred. The quilts shifted. She opened her eyes and blinked at the ceiling, then at the stacked wood, then at the children curled in their blankets. She tried to sit. Pain found her ribs and made her grimace. "Easy," Jack said. "You're safe." She turned her head. The oil lamp made a soft circle around his chair. His boots were by the door and left dark melt rings on the boards. The photograph on the shelf caught the light and gave it back like a stare. "Where is this?" she asked, voice rough. "Silver Ridge, my place. Not Hale's." "No." She closed her eyes and let a breath out like someone who had been holding one all night. When she opened them again, she looked toward the table. Lily watched from behind the chair, thumb pressed to her mouth. Noah sat up and rubbed his face with his sleeve. "Drink," Jack said. He held a tin cup, and Eliza sipped. The water tasted like snow and iron. He set the cup down and lifted the corner of the quilt. Finger marks bloomed along the line of her upper arm, green at the edges and purple in the middle. She pulled the fabric back over them without comment. "Thank you," she said. Jack nodded. He stood and ladled broth into bowls. He handed one to Noah, one to Lily, one to Eliza. She held it steady with both hands, as if it might float away. The warmth set color back under her skin. A little at a time she swallowed. By mid-morning, the cabin had settled into work. Jack split kindling out back and checked the roofline for drifts. Noah carried slivers to the box by the stove. Lily played with the hem of the patchwork cloth and hummed nonsense to her doll. Eliza stood at the counter and pressed flour and lard into a dough. The sound of her hands in the bowl was soft and patient. She cut potatoes into quarters and dropped them into a pot, then reached for a small tin of salt. She moved like someone who had once cooked for a table and was trying to remember quantities. When the dough had rested, she rolled it out with a bottle and folded it into layers. She glanced at Lily. "Want to try?" she asked. Lily lifted onto her toes and pressed small palms flat into the flour. She giggled when it stuck to her fingers. Eliza brushed the flour away with the back of a knuckle. Her smile came and went fast, as if it were a habit she had lost and found by accident. The oil lamp caught a thread on the patchwork edge. Eliza reached down and drew it through. It was red against her skin. She threaded a needle and tied a knot like a tiny bead. Then she mended the frayed edge with even stitches and did not comment when Jack looked toward her bag. A sharp sound split the quiet. The chestnut mare in the nearest stall struck the boards with both back feet. Jack heard it through the wall and set his axe aside. He grabbed his coat. "Stay inside," he told the children. He opened the door. The cold was a blade laid flat across his face. The barn had shaken snow from its roof and wore a new white cap. He crossed the yard. The mare rolled her eyes when he slid the door open. Steam puffed around her like engines at rest. Her tail was lifted and stuck with straw. The smell was fresh blood and wet hay. Eliza Jack called over his shoulder without thinking, then caught himself. "No, stay." She had the coat on before he finished the word. She came up behind him, the hem of her borrowed skirt dark with melt. Her face was calm in a way that did not belong to the rest of her bruises. "What is it?" she asked. "Breech," he said. "Foal is wrong way." She stepped to the mare's shoulder, put one hand on the long, warm neck and the other on the halter strap. She spoke to the horse in a tone that had weight and soothed anyway. "Easy, girl. Ears up. Good." Jack washed his hands in a bucket and gritted his teeth as the cold bit to bone. He reached and found legs that did not feel right. He closed his eyes and pictured a foal in the dark. He worked slow. The mare leaned into the stall front and threatened to go down. "Keep her up," he said. Eliza braced one hip against the wall and set her shoulder under the mare's neck. The horse groaned, and the sound traveled through Eliza's bones into the boards. She kept one hand moving along the glossy skin, the other on the strap. The lamp swung on its nail and threw their shadows against the rafters. "Good," she said, "just a little more." Jack turned one small hoof and then the other, and felt the slide change. The mare bore down. Wet heat and the sweet, sick smell of birth filled the stall. He caught the foal as it came slick and shaking and laid it into clean straw. He rubbed at its chest with a burlap sack until the ribs lifted true. Eliza crouched and cleared the nostrils with 2 careful fingers. The foal coughed and pulled in air and made a sound no bigger than a bird. Jack sat back on his heels and let his shoulders drop. His breath left him in a white cloud. He looked at Eliza, not at the torn lace or the ring or the bruise under her eye. He saw the girl who used to help someone in a back room somewhere where animals came limping and mothers came scared, and somebody's hands had to be steady. "You have done this," he said. "My uncle was a veterinarian," she said. "He let me hold light." She put her palm to the mare's cheek and received a breath that smelled like hay and salt. The mare closed her eyes for a blink longer than normal and then began to nose the foal. They walked back through air that cut the inside of the nose. Eliza's cheeks were high with color. In the kitchen, she peeled her wet sleeves away from her wrists and stood by the stove until the sting faded. Lily brought her a dry cloth. Noah stared as if he had just seen someone make fire out of water. By late afternoon, the sky had cleared enough to turn hard blue. The cold held. Noah coughed and then coughed again. His forehead shone. He tried to laugh it off and could not. Jack felt something old crack open. He filled a basin and fumbled with willow bark in a cup, his fingers all questions. Eliza took the basin and set it on the table. She unknotted the kerchief with the red E and dipped it into the water. She wrung it out and laid it across Noah's brow. "That is yours," Jack said before he could stop his mouth. "It is," she said. "He needs it more." Noah's eyelids drooped. The room took on a slower sound. Eliza sat beside him and hummed. The tune was simple and swung in a circle. Jack felt his skin change temperature. Martha had used to sing that when Lily was a bundle and would not settle unless the house breathed with her. Eliza glanced up and saw Jack in the doorway. Her voice went quiet but did not stop. The lamp made a bowl of light on the boy's face. The red thread glowed where it crossed the cloth. Noah's hand crept toward Eliza's sleeve and stayed. When the fever broke toward evening, Jack let the air out of his lungs and set the cup down and did not look at his hands for a full minute. He put wood in the fire and stacked more inside near the door. He checked the barometer. The needle had crawled down past fair. He looked toward the road. Snow held the world in place. He pulled a folder from the high shelf and set it on the table. He took out a pencil. He wrote her name the way she had said it. He gave the day a number. He did not say what he planned to do with this. He slipped the paper back in and tied the string. Eliza stood near the window and watched the light leave the porch. The glass had a flaw in it that made the world ripple. In that ripple she could see herself not quite as she was. Hooves sounded on packed snow, not many, enough to carry weight. Wheels clicked over ice where ruts had frozen. Lily went still. Noah sat up as if the fever had never touched him. Jack reached the door and felt for the latch without looking. The lamp flame steadied, then lifted as the draft moved. Victor Hale stepped down from a black carriage, his coat lined with fur and his mouth already set. A man in a dark hat climbed out after him with a packet of papers under his arm. Victor Hale stepped into the yard as if the place already belonged to him. His boots left neat ovals on the hard crust. The man behind him held a packet of documents tied with twine. The carriage waited with its lamps dark. No other teams on the road. Even the birds held still in the cold. Jack opened the door wide enough to stand in it. The heat from the room breathed against his back. Lily's fingers found the hem of his shirt. Noah slid beside the window and peered through a crack in the curtain. Rowan Victor said, "I've come for my wife." The man in the hat cleared his throat. "Pratt, attorney. We have the record." He drew up a paper. Victor Hale and Eliza Hart joined in matrimony 3 weeks past by a minister licensed under the laws of the territory. Here is the certificate. Here is the county seal. Jack looked from the paper to Victor's face. Victor's eyes were flat and pale as old coins. "She is not a crate," Jack said. "I do not trade people at my door." Pratt lifted a hand as if calming a spooked horse. "No one suggests trade. This is a private matter of a lawful union. Harboring a man's spouse can rise to a charge." Eliza had come to the doorway without sound. The quilt still hugged her shoulders. The bruise on her arm made a shadow where the lamp did not reach. Her eyes went to the paper and then to Victor's mouth. The corners of her lips turned downward and held. Victor's tone sharpened. "Get your things, we are leaving. You have made enough trouble." Jack reached to the shelf and set a folder on the table. He untied the string and did not look down at his hands. He lifted a page and held it where Pratt could see. "A sworn statement," Jack said. Her words on what happened, descriptions of bruises, times noted, the physician's notes on the injuries, witness signatures. Pratt frowned and blinked. "From whom?" "Doc Kincaid." Jack angled his chin toward the road. Doc Kincaid stood by the fence in his coat breath, smoking from his beard. He had walked up when the carriage had stopped, drawn by the sound of wheels. His wife stood beside him with a shawl over her hair. 2 of the neighbors had come as well, hats in hand, eyes quiet, 1 foot on the lower rail. "I saw her that night the doctor called, right eye swollen shut, finger marks on the arm, split lip. I asked how she fell and she did not say. The story is on paper." Mrs. Kincaid lifted her chin. "And I sat with her until morning. That is not a crime." Pratt looked down at the certificates he carried as if they had changed weight. Victor's face did not. "She lied," Victor said. "She lied about what she was. You think you can make new skin out of paper. You think that makes anything clean." Eliza held the quilt tighter. Her mouth opened and then closed. She took a step backward into shadow. Victor turned to Jack. "You think she loves you. She does not. She has been touched and tossed back. You will be second to whatever I already put on her. That stink does not wash off." Noah flinched. Lily pressed her face to Jack's side. Eliza made a sound that was not quite a breath. She turned and went down the hallway. The quilt forgot her shoulders and slid to the floor like a dropped flag. Jack stood square in the door. "Leave." Pratt hesitated. "We can return to town and let a judge decide." Doc Kincaid nodded. "You do that." Victor stared at Jack for a long beat. It had the feel of a thrown rope that had missed. He looked past Jack into the room as if he could take something with his eyes. Then he turned, climbed into the carriage, and set his jaw at the horizon. Pratt followed, gathered his papers, and took his seat. The wheels found the ruts and whispered down the road until the sound went thin. The yard breathed again. The doctor gave Jack a small nod, then put his hand on his wife's back and walked away. The neighbors stirred. One touched his hat. They went back to chores and stoves and the shape of their own roofs against the sky. Jack shut the door with care. The latch found the strike and held. Eliza had scattered her few things on the bed in the small room off the kitchen. A comb, the leather bag, the piece of linen with the red E folded twice. Her hands shook as she tried to fit the world into the bag's small mouth. The ring on her finger caught on the edge and pinged. "I cannot stay," she said. "You can," Jack said. "I bring trouble through your door. Your children will hear it in town. Your name will carry it." Jack swallowed. His throat felt like cold iron. He looked at the window and saw nothing but snow and the shape of the barn. He looked back at her hands. They tried to be fast and fumbled. Lily appeared in the doorway, hair a-tangle from sleep. Her small hand cradled a square of cloth. It was the patchwork piece from the chair, all crooked corners and blue calico and warm brown. The stitches along one side were the kind a person learns by trying then keeps, because they were the first ones made. "Mama made this," Lily said. "She said, 'Give it to someone kind.'" Eliza did not reach for it at first. She stared as if Lily had offered her a live ember. Then she took it with both hands and pressed it against her chest. Her shoulders bent. She did not cry out. She did not say that she did not deserve it. The words lived behind her teeth and stayed. Jack stepped into the room and stood where he could see her eyes. "If you stay, we do not say his name in this house. Not at the table, not as a joke. Not when we are angry. We talk about wood and weather and what is needed for the day. We do not talk about him." Eliza's grip on the cloth eased. She kept one corner between forefinger and thumb. The red thread hung loose. She rolled it once and caught it under the pad of her finger. Noah came to the door frame and stood silent. He nodded at Eliza like a boy who had learned how to be sturdy by watching adults hold their tongues. The light had turned the color of a cold peach when Jack went out to the yard to fetch water. The clouds had thinned. The cold had not. The barn sat quiet. The fence slats wore rims of ice. Jack set the pail down and ran his thumb over the chain on the corral gate. The metal was scuffed bright in one spot that had been dull yesterday. The lock showed a graze like a blade had kissed it and then slipped away. He looked over the pasture. The herd stood heads low, steam drifting. A few tossed their muzzles as if flies still worked the air in winter. A calf bawled from the far side, and a cow answered with a sound that settled, then lifted again. Jack watched the sky for the kind of bird that follows trouble. None cut the air. The only thing moving was the last of the snow off a branch. He set the chain back where it lay and tested the hinge. The bolt felt loose in its hole. He tightened it and stepped back. The hair on his arms stood up inside his sleeves, though the coat was thick enough for a colder wind than this. Inside the cabin felt smaller with the sun almost gone. Jack put the water on and laid 2 more sticks on the fire. The lamp steadied and softened. The smell of flour and cinnamon had drifted up into the rafters and stayed there like a memory. Eliza was at the table with the patchwork across her knees. She was stitching the loose side with thread pulled from her own kerchief. The stitches were small and precise and almost invisible unless the light hit them. Lily sat beside her and pushed buttons into a line and called each one a name. Noah traced letters on a scrap and snuck looks at the door. Jack slid the folder back onto the shelf. He checked the bar on the door again. He turned down the lamp just a hair. A small tremor ran through the glass as if a palm had pressed against the outside. The flame drew to a fine point and held thin and steady, and in that thinness the room looked like a photograph that had forgotten it could move. In the yard, something shifted that was not wind, then left no trace. The cold snapped in the night and left everything glass-hard by morning. Jack woke to the kind of quiet that was not peace. The lamp on the table had burned down to a shallow cup. Frost feathered the inside of the window. The house had the sound of a held breath. He dressed and stepped into the yard. The first light lay thin along the fence rails. The air pinched his nose and made it ache. The barn door wore a curl of rime where the latch met the wood. He pushed it open. The horses turned their heads as one and watched him over the stall doors. The corral gate hung crooked. The chain lay slack and bright where a fresh cut had polished it. The padlock lay in the snow with a clean mouth nicked from a blade. Beyond the fence, the pasture showed a confusion of tracks that pointed in one direction, then disappeared where wind had swept the surface smooth. A hoof print near the gate showed a split shoe left hind. Jack had seen that mark before on the road behind Victor Hale's dun. He stood with his hands at his sides, his chest filled and would not empty. The herd had gone out in the dark when the house was listening to its own small sounds. No bawl, no thud of a gate. Whoever moved them knew how to keep hooves quiet on crusted snow. He went back to the cabin. Snow fell off his boots in clumps. Eliza had stoked the fire and set a kettle. Lily still slept in a little cave of quilts. Noah watched Jack with a kind of pretense that did not hold. "What is it?" Eliza asked. Jack set his gloves on the table and stared at the wood grain where his palm had worn it smooth. "The herd is gone." Noah sat up. "Gone where?" Jack lifted his eyes to Eliza. "Gone." The word landed and made the room tilt. Eliza's hand found the chair back and steadied. She did not speak first. She waited for the rest, and no more came. "I knew something would break," Jack said, "the day you walked in my door." Her shoulders lifted. It was not shock. It was a small defense. "I never wanted that." "You did not have to want it," he said. "You brought his shadow across my yard." Noah flinched at the sound of his father's voice. Lily turned and blinked awake, and then closed her eyes again, refused the morning. Eliza nodded once as if someone had said her name in a list. "Then I will go." "Will that bring back a single hoof?" Jack asked. The question came out dull and hard. No. He could not go back into the words to soften them. They had already frozen where they lay. He went to the shelf and checked the rifle and set it back without a sound. He stepped outside and walked the fence one more time with his hands behind his back like a man counting his own steps for proof. In the kitchen, Eliza folded her few things. She placed the linen with the red E on top. She touched the ring and left it where it was. The photographs on the shelf watched her with their old eyes. She wrote on a scrap with a piece of charcoal and set it under the cup. "Town." By the time the sun cleared the cottonwood, she had gone. Jack saw the note at midday. He stood with it pinched between thumb and finger and felt nothing for a long minute. Then he set it down like something that could crack. Eliza walked the road with her bag, and the cold turning her breath to steam. The sky had a high, thin blue to it that gave no warmth. The ruts on the main track were hard as iron. She passed a fence where crows had pecked at a frozen carcass and left black feathers in the snow that shone purple in the light. She kept going. The town of Silver Ridge smelled like wood smoke and horses and the yeast sweet of the bakery. Mrs. Delaney's window showed rows of rolls dusted with sugar. Eliza put her hand flat to the glass for a second, then took it away and went on. The pawn shop door creaked. The man behind the counter looked up, took in the bruises on her wrist, did not ask. Eliza unclasped her locket. It was oval and wore a shallow wreath of leaves on one side. The hinge had a hitch in it where a fingernail had worried it open too many times in years before this one. Inside was a lock of brown hair pressed flat as if it were still listening. "How much?" she asked. The pawnbroker named a number that would buy seed and 2 crates of chicks and leave enough for a sack of flour. She nodded. The chain slid off her palm like water. He wrapped the locket in paper and pushed coins across the counter. She did not count. She held the money in her glove like it could burn through, then tucked it into the small bag and left. Mrs. Delaney stepped out of her shop as Eliza passed. She put 2 warm cinnamon rolls into Eliza's hands and closed her fingers over them. "Take these," she said. "I will not hear refusal." Eliza swallowed thanks she could not shape. The sugar stuck to her lip. The warmth traveled into her fingers and then her wrists. At the feed store, Eliza bought seed potatoes and a sack of red beans. She bought a crate of Rhode Island chicks that peeped like spilled corn. She tested the slats on a used chicken crate and paid for it with a coin that had bent at the edge and would not go back. She tied the crate to a small sled and pulled. The wood squealed on the hard ruts. Her breath left her in visible pulses. The sun held small and moved a finger's width toward the ridge by the time she reached the yard again. She set the crate down by the fence, and the peeping filled the cold air with a ridiculous brightness. Jack came from the barn with a rope coiled over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw the crate and the sack and the woman with snow on her lashes. "You sold it," he said. His voice was not angry. It was rough with something else. "My mother's necklace," she said. "Yes." "That was the last thing you had." She shook her head. "Not the last. Not if I still have hands." She dragged the crate to a patch of ground where the fence cut a corner. The soil there took sun early when there was any. She set the sack of potatoes down and took a shovel from beside the barn. The blade struck the frost and rang. She struck again. A seam opened. Her breath went shorter and louder. The red of her knuckles showed through where the skin had thinned in the cold. Jack watched. He walked to her and put his hand on the shovel and steadied it. She did not give the tool up. She shifted her grip to make room for his and pushed. The blade bit deeper. "You should not be out here alone," he said. "I was not," she said. "You just had not joined me yet." They worked until they had turned a plot the size of the kitchen floor. Eliza set the seed potatoes in a box by the door. She poured chick feed into a shallow pan and bent to show the yellow cluster how to find it. Their beaks clicked. Their small feet skittered. Lily laughed and clapped. Noah crouched and reached a careful finger to touch a downy back. Dusk was a thin coin dropped in the west. Jack went to the shed and came back with something wrapped in sacking. He set it on the porch and pulled the cloth away. A small 2-person swing sat there, sanded smooth, hung from stout hooks under the eave. The back was curved. Along its top rail, someone had carved letters with the care of a steady hand. Noah, Lily, Jack, Eliza. Eliza stood very still. The world narrowed to the line of those names. The grooves held a dark stain that made the letters look like they had always been part of the wood. She reached and laid her fingers on the E and felt the cold of the cut. "If you do not want to be part of it, Jack said I can sand it off." She shook her head once. She took the seat. The chain creaked and then settled. Jack sat beside her. The swing gave a small forward drift and came back. The lamplight from inside reached the boards at their feet and made one square bright and the rest dark. Jack reached into his pocket and brought out a strip of braided leather brown from age soft in the places where rains had run through a hand years ago. At the center hung a tiny wooden bead carved like a horseshoe. He turned it in his palm once, then held it out. "I do not have much," he said. "I can give you my days and the wood I will split and whatever comes from this ground. I can give you my name. No preacher unless you want one. No crowd unless you want them. Just a yes." Eliza looked at the bead. The leather held the faint smell of horse and smoke and something clean. She took it and tied it around her wrist. The knot lay against the red E of her kerchief where it had slipped to her sleeve. "Looks like a wedding," she said, the corner of her mouth lifting. "Mr. Rowan." Jack's breath left him and came back steadier. He put his arm around her and felt the shape of a person who had decided to stay. Inside, Lily pressed her face to the window and whispered to Noah without taking her eyes off the swing. Noah said nothing. He smiled a small smile that kept his teeth hidden and his eyes bright. Later, when the children slept, Eliza sat on the swing with a needle and drew the loose red thread through the edge of the seat cushion she had pieced together from scraps. The stitches traveled a neat line along the fabric and then bit into the cotton and came out again, each the same length as the last. The thread caught the lamplight and looked like a vein. The yard went quiet under starlight. The cold turned loud again in the kind of way a person hears in their own bones. From the ridge above the pasture, a single sound came too far to name, then stopped. The lamp in the window brightened a little and held. Morning came clear as cut glass. The snow in the shadows held on in thin sheets, but the path to the old horse barn lay swept and brown. Jack had hung cedar boughs over the doorframe. Someone had strung a thin arch of pine cones and dried cornflowers on twine. The smell was sap and dust, sweet and clean. The oil lamp on a peg threw a warm coin of light and did not flicker. Reverend Mills stood by a hay bale with his book shut in his hands. His coat had shiny elbows. He smiled like a man who liked to see people stand close. Mrs. Delaney carried a box that smelled like sugar and cinnamon and kept telling the children to wait, which made them bounce more. Doc Kincaid and his wife found a spot near the stall where the chestnut mare drowsed and blinked. A few neighbors came and laid their gloves in their hats and held them both. Eliza stepped into the barn. She wore a dress made from white muslin cut out of old curtains and a stripe of pale blue from a trunk. The stitches along one sleeve wandered and came back in line. Her hair was pinned smooth with loose pieces that did not bother to be perfect. She held a small bouquet tied with red thread. The ring still on her finger caught a point of light and went still. Noah waited under the arch with a handful of wild stems that had braved the ditch where the sun hit early. His ears were pink from the cold. He passed the flowers up to Eliza and looked at the floor and then back up at her. "I blew on dandelions for you," he said. Eliza's breath shook once. She pulled him in and hugged him tight and did not worry about creasing the dress. "Thank you," she whispered into his hair. "I heard you." Jack took his place across from her. His shirt was clean and stiff at the collar. A strip of braided leather lay tucked into his pocket, where the bead pressed against his palm like a small heart. He looked at Eliza and saw the woman who had held a horse steady with her shoulder and a boy's fever with a cloth and a song. Reverend Mills opened his book and closed it again without reading. "If you have words, say them." Jack cleared his throat. His voice found its shape against wood and rope and straw. "I promise to listen when you do not speak. I promise to stand by you when the wind takes a run at the door. I promise to make a place at the table and a place in the work. I will not ask you to earn your place." Eliza looked at his hands and then at his face. Her own voice was steady. "I promise not to run. I will stay where love stays. I will mend what my hands can mend and let the rest breathe." Reverend Mills nodded. "That will do." Jack took the strip of leather and tied it around Eliza's wrist again, slower this time, as if making a knot that would hold in any weather. Eliza slid the ring that had been a mark of one life and made it a piece of this one, the gold still gold, and no longer a chain. Lily moved to the front with a look like she had been practicing for this. She lifted the box lid at Mrs. Delaney's nod. The sweet rolled out. Sugar stuck to the tips of small fingers. Laughter knocked around the rafters and bumped into the old boards where once the wind had howled. Someone cheered when the chestnut mare reached over the stall and nosed Jack's shoulder as if to approve. Jack held out his hand. "Dance with me, Mrs. Rowan." They stepped into the pale yard. The barn threw a long blue shadow. The oil lamp in the doorway burned steady. Eliza set her palm in Jack's. The music they found was the creak of leather, the scuff of boots, the drift of a tune hummed by someone who could not help himself. Jack lifted Eliza's hand and turned her once. Her skirt skimmed dirt where snow had given up. The cold kissed their faces and left no claim. Later, people went home by slow routes. Reverend Mills shook Jack's hand with both of his and blessed them by saying nothing at all. Mrs. Delaney slipped a paper packet into Eliza's palm that held cinnamon and a pinch of something she would not name. Doc Kincaid patted the mare's neck and told her to keep a lookout. The yard emptied. The quiet felt full. In the afternoon, Jack took the black strip from the shelf. It had sat there flat for weeks, neither worn nor put away. He folded it once and then again and laid it in the drawer with the matches, shut the drawer, and let it be a drawer. They hung a small sign over the side door of the barn where the light fell just right. The words were painted in careful letters on smoothed pine. Thread and thought. Inside, Eliza set a long table where feed sacks used to stack. She laid out needles in a small box and spools of red and blue and brown thread. She set a jar of buttons that had never matched to anything. The first to come was a boy with a cap too big and eyes like river stones. He did not speak. He watched the room without moving. Eliza slid a square of linen across to him and a blunt needle. She touched her own chest, and then the cloth a simple chain of gestures. He understood. He wrote his name with 2 fingers on the wood, first to practice, then made the motions again in thread. The shape was crooked and proud. He nodded once, and the nod held. More children came. A girl whose mother cleaned at the hotel and slept in afternoons. A set of brothers who had never seen the inside of the school for very long at a time. Lily perched at the end and showed them how to fold a knot without a tail. Noah sounded out letters from a worn primer and tapped the page where the sound sat. On the wall near the door, Eliza framed a square of linen with red stitches, faint in one corner, the edges even now. The words across the middle read in a hand that had learned by doing. "Begin anyway." Jack stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands and watched the room change shape to hold more than it had been built to hold. The oil lamp on its hook stayed plain and bright. The breeze at the sill only made the flame lean and straighten as if breathing with the people there. Toward evening, Jack took his knife and walked to the porch swing. He ran the blade soft along the top rail to find the smooth grain. Then he set the tip and cut slow. The letters rose with care under his hand where the names already lived. He wiped the shaving dust away with his thumb. Hope. Eliza came to the door and held it open with her hip and listened. The chicks peeped in their crate and then settled when the lamp near them turned lower. The potatoes in the box by the back step showed the smallest eyes. The air smelled like wood and flour and the clean side of wool. Noah chased a patch of sunlight across the floor and caught it with his hands and let it go. Eliza sat beside Jack and set her fingers on the new cut. The porch boards were warm from the day. The cottonwood behind the house stirred and answered itself. Far along the road a carriage passed without turning in. The sound of its wheels faded into the kind of quiet that keeps a place whole. Lily curled into the swing with her doll. Noah climbed up on Jack's other side and leaned until his shoulder met Jack's. The swing gave a little, then steadied. The oil lamp in the window held its round of gold. The red thread in the cushion showed one clean line that ran the length of the seat and did not snap. Eliza opened a book and began to read, her voice low and sure. The words found their way into the boards and the rafters and the places where old Cold had lived. The wind came down off the hills and met the house and went around it. The light inside did not flicker. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.